Hello everyone and welcome to the second webinar in Oaks Consultancy's Fundraising in Sport for Development series. We're absolutely delighted to have you join us. So throughout this series, we've had the pleasure to be in conversation with leading global figures in the sector to really reflect on some of the insights that we found in a survey that we ran with partners last autumn. It's been published widely and we really hope that you've enjoyed reflecting on it and enjoyed the conversations that we've had since. So the report actually presented some data on the immediate impact of COVID-19, impact it's had on fundraising and wider. Of course, shared how the sector feels it's going to recover immediately, but also the longer term future and how that might look. So back in March, we held the first webinar where we kicked off the series in conversation with global networks. But today, we are joined with leaders from some of the most innovative delivery organisations from across the world, and they're going to tell us how they tackle fundraising challenges that were presented to their organisations from the pandemic. We welcome your questions throughout today's webinar, so please do drop them into the questions in the chat box. We'll try and get through as many as we can, and we'll interweave them throughout the conversation. Obviously, if we don't, we will try and pick them up with you directly afterwards. But let's get the opportunity now to meet with our panel. So I'm just going to quickly introduce them and give them an opportunity to tell them more about their role. So if we begin with Mairead King, who's Director of the Arsenal Foundation, if you'd like to tell us about what you do at the Arsenal Foundation.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Hi, everybody. So as Beth mentioned, my name is Mairead. I'm Director of the Arsenal Foundation. For those of you who don't know about the Arsenal Foundation, our mission is to changing lives through football, and we also work locally within our local community around the Emirates Stadium, mainly in the boroughs of Islington, Camden and Hackney. And we also have an international strategy where we are changing lives through football through our global program, which is called Coaching for Life. We've launched this program in the slum communities in Jakarta in Indonesia and also in Zaatari refugee camp in Jordan, which is home to over 80,000 Syrian refugees.
Thank you. And we're also joined by LaToya Fisher, who's Director of PeacePlayers in Baltimore.
Hi everybody, LaToya Fisher representing PeacePlayers, where we use basketball to bring together divided communities, both internationally and where I'm based in the US. I am the director of our Baltimore site, but we have locations in Cyprus, Northern Ireland, the Middle East, South Africa, and in the US, we're based in Chicago, LA, Detroit, Brooklyn, and Baltimore. So super excited to be here.
Thank you. On our panel today as well is Felix, Spowage, Development Director at Skateistan.
Hi everyone, my name is Felix. I work for Skateistan. We work in Afghanistan, Cambodia and South Africa, empowering children through a mixture of skateboarding and education programs. We work with about 3,000 students a week and have a big focus on working with girls, children living with disabilities and street working children. I've been working with the organisation since 2014 in communications and fundraising roles, and yeah, really happy to be here today and hear about everyone else's experiences and learn from one another.
Thank you, Felix. And we're also joined by Steve Fleming, who's the co-founder of Kick for Life SC.
Hi everybody. So Kick for Life, we're based in Lesotho in Southern Africa, where we deliver a range of sport for good programs around health, education, employability and gender. We also have some social enterprises attached to the organisation, which are really an extension of our programme model and also part of our fundraising mix. So a hotel, a restaurant, a football club. And then we also have Kick for Life Assist, which is an international training consulting service for the sport for good sector. And we've worked with organisations around the world over the last few years.
Thank you, everyone. So I'm now going to hand over to our chair for this discussion today, which is Luke Southall, Managing Director at Oaks Consultancy.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm Luke Southall, Managing Director at Oaks, and for those who don't know us, we work with sport development organisations right across the world, supporting with strategy, fundraising, sustainability, and capacity building. And I'll be the chair for the discussion today, so hopefully you'll hear as little as possible from me, as much as possible from our fantastic panelists. So yeah, again, thank you all for joining us. We're kind of overwhelmed at the interest and engagement that we've had in this series so far, and we're bowled over to see it continuing today. I think the whole series was launched on the back of our State of the Sector report that we launched in January, and that was developed last year by talking to lots of organisations in sport development across the world and trying to get a picture of how the pandemic had impacted fundraising and income right across the world. Unsurprisingly, it didn't paint a great picture, and in 2020 was incredibly tough for everyone, with 2021 promising to be no less punishing. However, I think certainly from the first webinar we held in March, and the vibe for today is all about accentuating the positives, of which there are many things to be really positive about. And we're thrilled to have our esteemed panelists here today who have kind of been there on the ground and are doing it and have lots of fantastic things to share with us. We're kind of halfway through the year now, so hopefully we've got a really good sense of how the year's playing out. And as such, today, our change makers, representatives from 4 of the world's leading sport development organisations, will be here to share lots of practical, I think, ideas and bits of advice and learnings that we can all take back into our own organisations. We'll want to hear about things that have worked really well. We want to hear about things that perhaps haven't worked as well, and what we can take from that and how we can, turn them into something really practical that we can implement as we go through, but not just this year, but beyond, as we come out of the pandemic into the new world as well. So yeah, we don't want to dwell too much on identifying the causes of the challenges and issues. I think we're all acutely aware of them. We will really want to focus on the positives and the things that we can do to come out of this stronger than before. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thank you to our series partners, Lorry Sport for Good Foundation, Street Football World, sportanddev.org, and Beyond Sport for their continued support in the series as well. So final reminder, as Beth said, please get your questions in as we go, and I'll try and get as many as possible to the panelists. And yeah, without delaying any further, let's get started. And Steve, my first question is for you. So in the State of the Sector report that I mentioned, the majority of organisations we spoke to were expecting a reduction in income last year, and I think over 80% were forecasting further reductions of segmentation into 2021. So from your perspective, Kick for Life, kind of great to hear what's the impact been for you guys on fundraising, and how do you see it shaping out in 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, well, it's been a dramatic impact on Kick for Life. We lost 25% of our income overnight because we had the hospitality social enterprises with a national lockdown. They had to close immediately with no government furlough scheme in place, so that was a huge challenge. And then, of course, other events that we have, international tours that we run to Lesotho couldn't happen, some of our gala in-person events as well. And all of that happening at a time when our beneficiary needs were at their greatest in terms of health education, in terms of protection of some of the vulnerable groups that we work with. And we looked at it with a financial sustainability holistically, as opposed to just at fundraising. So initially we looked at what we could reduce other than just cutting salaries. What could we reduce? How could we adapt our existing programs and models to continue delivering our programs and meeting our grant requirements? Then also looking at how we could fundraise in the new environment, and then finally trade, the social enterprise part. How could we preserve and protect our enterprises so that we could bounce back? And those 4 areas, reduce, adapt, fundraise and trade, create a nice acronym of RAFT, which was kind of the process that we went through. And then we've been, with the support of the Sport for Good Response Fund, we were able to then work with about 15 organisations around the world to support them, walk them through that process as well, and see some good outcomes. So it's been tough. I'd say 2021 is going to be tough, and probably going on as well. It's going to be a tougher economic environment going forward, and we're going to need to look at our strategies and make sure we're fit for purpose going forward. But hopefully today, as you said, lots of positives going to come out of this session.
Yeah, absolutely. I think RAFT is a great way to start as well. It's a really nice, easy way to kind of focus that approach as well. Great. I think, LaToya, similar question to you. It's really interesting, obviously, when you joined PeacePlayers right at the start, I think just right as the pandemic was kind of really taking off. So really interesting time to be joining an organisation and facing these challenges. So yeah, how's it been playing out for you?
Sure, yeah, it forced us to be really creative. We were fortunate enough that we had partners that were very flexible and patient as we figured out how to navigate the new norm, knowing that in-person programming was shutting down. Since we rely heavily on potential donors and partners seeing programming in person, we really had to make sure that our virtual programs were just as engaging and powerful and really conveyed what we were all about. So we took the time to kind of see our like pain points and the problems that were created by the pandemic, such as activities being canceled, the need for youth to have something positive to do and a fun experience, but also not to give them that Zoom fatigue. And we figured out how we could address these issues. So we found ways to still meet as many metrics and outcomes as we could so that we could stay eligible for funding. And then we cut things out of the budget that weren't really a necessity so we could make sure to keep our coaches and staff on and to continue our programming. And then we also just used the time to build strategic plans for fundraising and development so that post-pandemic, when we're budgeting for the rest of 2021 and 2022, it could actually be a year where we'd see some decent growth.
And how's that playing out in 2021? Have you started to implement those new plans?
Yeah, so because of the relationships we've been able to build and just like being very open with those potential partners, even if they're like their priorities shifted during COVID, we've been able to kind of tell them, you know, these are the things we're looking to do. Now that we're engaging back in person, you know, these are the activities we'd love you to come and see. And so it's been really helpful to just like keep them abreast and like what's on the radar and just, you know, always keeping them in the loop.
Great. Thank you. Mairead, so similar, I mean, you joined at a similar kind of time, I think, but, you know, in terms of during the pandemic. And how's that been for you? And how do you kind of see the rest of 2021 playing out? And then ultimately, how do you see the landscape changing beyond the kind of post-pandemic world from a fundraising perspective? I think we've got you on mute, Mairead.
All right. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think it'll come as no surprise that our experience has been very similar to what's come through in your report and also what Steve and LaToya were saying. It's obviously been a challenge. A number of our key events, like our annual gala, has had to be cancelled 2 years in a row, etc. But I think one of the words that LaToya said were at the forefront of our minds was creativity and really adapting the programs we have. And so we really looked at what were the needs in our local community and in our global community really quickly as a result of COVID and adapted our programming in that way. And what we found was that when we did that, and the results were quite good, and I'll speak to those in a second, that our donors actually came on the journey with us and they said, yes, you're definitely trying something. So I think we placed ourselves in a good position to say, you know, we still need your support, we still need your funding. So it was a good engagement journey that continued during COVID, despite the fact that face-to-face, say, football sessions weren't able due to lockdown in the communities we were working in. But so, for example, in our local community, we realized that there was a real issue with food banks locally. And so we partnered with an organization, and during the first and second lockdown before Christmas of 2020, we were able to deliver almost 500,000 meals into our local borough. And I think because we really recognized the local needs and what was really necessary, a lot of our donors who supported our local work were really impressed by that. So in a way, then it made our fundraising asks easier, even though our major key events were cancelled. So that's been a positive, actually. On our international work, something very similar. Again, we weren't able to have face-to-face sessions, but because we were able to look at adapting the program with our partners, in this case, it's Save the Children, do stuff remotely, it showed that we didn't just abandon those communities, we didn't forget them. We put other ways of working that we're in. Maybe they aren't as ideal as face-to-face, but we were doing something. And again, our donors, keeping that engagement up, giving our donors updates, and continuing to let them know that, you know, these communities were still part of the Arsenal family, we were still there for them. And the adaptations we did in, say, for example, Zaatari refugee camp, were training the kids on you know, how to be COVID secure, washing their hands, these kind of things. So we became part of that program. And that's again had a benefit for us in terms of going back to talk to our donors. And another really strange thing that happened unexpectedly was in Jordan, the Ministry of Education moved all of their curriculum online for kids in primary school because all the kids were out of school. And they found that putting, lesson after lesson after lesson on Zoom was too much for kids, as you can imagine. And so for their mental health and well-being, they wanted to put something in between each lessons. And they had heard, we'd already advocated with them around benefits of coaching for life. They knew that we were doing that in the camp. And so they approached Arsenal and said, would we do sports snippets in between each of the lessons for kids? So as a result of that, we were able to get some of our staff to record, keepy uppy exercises in their back gardens, something fun for kids. One of our local team, one of our staff members became kind of the Joe Wicks of Jordan because it was all translated into Arabic. And we were able to show that in between kids' lessons. And it was a huge success. They put it on 14 times a day. The kids loved it. Jordanian kids were exposed to it, and Syrian children as well in the camp. So I think what that shows is that with a bit of creativity and adapting things, you can still be authentic in what you're trying to achieve and the needs you're trying to address. And once you do that, your donors will come with you. So I'm very optimistic going forward because I think that we haven't stopped during the pandemic. And I know that's true of a lot of organizations in the sports for development sector. We've really tried to be creative. And I've heard some great other stories as well. So yeah, that gives you a good foundation. So I'm quite optimistic, even though we're having more events and more fundraising streams cancelled in 2021.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mairead. Yeah, and that word creativity again, really important. Felix, so yeah, Skateistan, how's it been going for you guys?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's been a really difficult 2 years, and like all the other panelists, we've kind of had to innovate in many ways and adapt to virtual programming, switch some of our focus towards providing food packages in certain locations. But in general, I think in terms of fundraising, I'm fairly positive about the next couple of years and the remainder of this year. I think it's clear now that we have to be really adaptable in fundraising, and I think adapting isn't always as simple as taking say an event that you used to do and taking it online, but kind of really rethinking your approach and reconsidering whether there's another kind of more sustainable, more scalable kind of future focused format to your fundraising. But I think a lot's changed in recent years, and the diversity of income streams is really the top thing. You need that split across foundations, corporate support, individual support, institutional government support, and in the case of Skateistan, this has been a focus of ours for some years, because we were always kind of a little bit concerned that if international kind of political focus shifted away from Afghanistan, then we might lose quite large chunks of support. So I think thinking about this a few years ago and trying to bring on some kind of larger corporate sponsors and ramp up our focus on individual giving and all of our kind of like proactive PR stuff was a really big factor in making it through this difficult period. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's obviously something that is kind of almost a truism about diversity of income being so important, but I think this last couple of years has really demonstrated why, hasn't it? And those organisations who've been able to build that over a number of years have really been the ones who've been able to kind of make it through as well. Just a reminder, please do send through questions, and we'll get those to the panelists as we go through. So moving just slightly on to some more specific fundraising activities. And LaToya, you mentioned at the start about having to kind of redevelop your fundraising strategy and come up with new ways, new activities this year and beyond. What are some of the things you've done that have worked really well, and what are the kind of success stories that you've experienced in trying these new approaches?
Yeah, so what we saw in the US is that a lot of foundations and organizations shift the focus of their support to the COVID relief. So what we did, similar to what Felix mentioned, was really started to leverage our individual and private donor network a little bit more so that we could do some of that grassroots peer-to-peer fundraising. So as individuals started to reach out wanting to host fundraisers for PeacePlayers, we had more time to focus on launching and supporting their initiatives due to the pandemic, whereas before we didn't have as much time to like help them really like customize and tweak it. So some of the unique campaigns that we're able to launch were one with this guy whose name is Leo Walsh, and he has a page called Peach Baskets, and he rode his bike across the country for 2 months from Pennsylvania to California in order to raise awareness for us specifically in the US. And we also did a Make the Pass challenge, which highlighted the importance of physical activity. And then some of our participants and coaches and staff shared their stories about how sports has impacted their life. And then we also made sure to get our participants involved through this campaign called Pledge for Peace. And basically what we did was during a week, they took 10,000 shots from all different sites to show unity and then also highlight our Global Friendship Games initiative, which is usually where we bring together our young leaders from the program that were chosen based on their participation and just the potential that they showed. And we usually we were going to have it in the Middle East, but of course it had to be done in a virtual space. But those were just some of the ways that we tried to get people involved at all of the different levels in the organization.
Fantastic, fantastic, great. And Mairead, something that's been raised already by Felix in terms of the people kind of pivoting to online and digital fundraising events. That's kind of been a huge focus over the last 18 months or so. What's kind of your take on that in terms of your experience and how successful you think this has been for you, but also for the rest of the sector?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting one because I think early on in the pandemic, everybody rushed to digital and online events, and there was a flurry of quizzes and all sorts of things on Zoom. And then I think people got a bit of Zoom fatigue, so it kind of peaked, and then now it's kind of plateaued, I would say. But I think initially as an engagement and as a fundraising tool, it was really effective. I know quite early on after the first lockdown, and because there was no, all the football games were being played behind closed doors, we were really concerned about engaging with our fans and supporters. And so we ran an online event called Arsenal Together in June of last year. And it was really to, put our arms around our fans and supporters and really make them feel part of the Arsenal family again. So that was the number one objective. But we also were able to fundraise for the foundation as part of that as well. And so it was quite interesting to do that, and we had a number of players involved on screen. We had a number of celebrities who are Arsenal fans also presenting as well. And we had great engagement. And I think, people really felt part of Arsenal. And although they were missing the game, this was something that was put on specially for them. In terms of the fundraising, as I said, because that was more as a second objective, it's harder to judge the success of that, because we know that a lot of organizations, say like Comic Relief or Sport Relief, they're billed as a charity fundraiser. They have a telethon, they're broadcast on TV, so it's very clear that you're giving to charity. But it was our first time doing something like that, and we had our first time doing text to donate, which was really interesting because you learn a lot about the compliance around text to donate, particularly in the UK, what messaging you have to put there, etc. So that was quite a good learning experience. Text to donate, from a legislative point of view, is only available for people in the UK if you're doing an event based in the UK. So we still have a huge global audience. So we still had Just Giving, and people were able to go onto our website, and we directed them to our website where they could link onto a Just Giving page, which is a bit clunkier than text to donate. But still, it was really, really good. And in terms of awareness raising of the foundation, it was fantastic. So all our fans learned more and more about our work. And in between, you know, interviews with players, different players spoke about their experience when they went out into the field to meet participants in our different programs. So it was really good from that perspective. Whether that will replace our more traditional forms of fundraising, I'm not really sure. I mean, our gala is a really big event. It's called A Night to Inspire. Our players attended. It's a significant fundraiser for us. Our plans are to still continue with that in-person event. You know, with some of our donors as well, I suppose there's a different dimension to us because our donors like to go to a game. We may have a dinner or a lunch arranged around the football game, so they're seeing the football game, they're physically there, and so we'll have that one-to-one contact with them. But I think if you're doing more kind of mass market fundraising, definitely digital is a good way to go. I mean, you know, during the pandemic, nobody's been carrying cash because it's, you know, nobody wanted to, shops don't want to take cash, so we've all got used to being kind of cashless as a result of the pandemic. So I think people will be just expecting to tap their card to donate wherever they're going now. And I think it will be remiss of organisations not to have that at the forefront of their mind, especially for mass fundraising. But I do still think an element of face-to-face will always be needed, and, you know, will always be a priority when, particularly if you're going in for very large asks. I think that engagement is still really important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a growing component of the fundraising mix in the future. A question in from the audience, Steve. I think I'll bring this one to you along the same lines of what we've just been discussing. So, how have you found the competition against other international bodies or charities when doing digital fundraising amidst the pandemic? But yeah, it's a really good point that there's obviously so many competing asks and organisations who are kind of looking for limited resources. So yeah, how have you found that, and how do you think that could be navigated?
Yeah, well, digital fundraising hasn't been a huge component of what we've done at Kick for Life, but in terms of competing in a competitive marketplace, then identity has been a really important part for us. This before the pandemic, but especially now, I think having a clear identity of who we are as an organisation, what makes us distinct and different to others out there. And it's evolved over the years. I think we started off very much as an HIV health education charity, and our identity has evolved into being more around social enterprise, employability and gender. And I think really focusing on having that strong strategy and identity, I think there is a temptation when fundraising is particularly tough to be fundraising led and to go after what opportunities are out there. But I think more important than ever to be financially sustainable and to be social impact sustainable is to have a clear strategy about what you're doing, why you're doing it. And I think that's definitely helped Kick for Life. During the pandemic, we made a big announcement where we became the first top flight football club in the world to commit to equal gender budgets for our men's and women's teams. I think that's really given us something powerful to talk about and to position ourselves as an organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. A real clarity of purpose and identity. I mean, that's yeah, crucial. Great. So kind of on the theme of income diversification, which is obviously fundamental to what we're talking about. Lots of organisations we spoke to throughout the research on developing our report showed that actually trust foundations and institutions were the primary source of income that they were generating to get through the pandemic. Felix, are there any areas that you think are currently underutilised? There might be really good opportunities for growth within the sport development sector.
Yeah, well, I mean, I kind of feel like individual giving, campaigning, and kind of really big, having a really big kind of PR and communications focus is fairly underutilised across the sector, especially in smaller organisations. I think there's there's kind of a natural tendency to focus on getting large kind of project-based chunks, and then there's usually a lot of kind of reporting work to be done with that, and fundraising probably gets left where it is at that. The problem obviously being that if you lose some of those big chunks, you've got a major gap. And I think new organisations find it quite difficult to make any investment in any other areas of the organisation that might not be covered by such a project. So where you've got a really long road ahead with kind of building out networks of individual funders, and whether that's people giving kind of a sort of mass market level or a kind of high value once a year kind of level, it's an investment that in the long run will kind of add value to your organisation and help you serve your kind of your beneficiaries better. And I think going about increasing those sources of income is all about increasing the profile of the organisation and proactive kind of communications projects, films and media articles, and getting celebrity ambassadors on board. I think in a lot of the time it's really hard to see the benefit in investing a lot of time into those activities because there's no kind of immediate fundraising return on it. But an example for us was at Skateistan. We were lucky enough last year to be the subject of a short documentary which won an Oscar, and there was and that generated huge kind of opportunities for us in basically every kind of funding stream because there was such a spotlight on our work. And I think what you got to bear in mind is that we started working on making this film 5 years ago, and it was like a lot of time from quite a small team, and there was very little guarantee that it was going to be as big as it was. We just kind of had to take a bit of a risk in investing in that there, and in the end it really paid off. I can't tell you how many individual supporters kind of found out about us through film and media and stuff. And I think on the other side, with more with other kind of like sort of traditional funders, foundations and institutions, I think it's really important that you create a bond with your grants managers and the people you work with there. The chances are there's going to be a connection there, right? And I think you can't be afraid to sort of be yourself and show your passion for your work, and try to understand the people that are kind of kind enough to support you, and being just open and honest with people, right, and not just sort of reeling off the contents of your last report that you've submitted, but really bringing people into some of the challenges your organisation is facing. And I think generally people, whether they're working on behalf of a big institution or they're an individual giving their own money, people are much more likely to be invested in your organisation if they're a part of the whole journey.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. Whether it's a corporate, whether it's an institution, it's still people investing in people, isn't it? It's still people on the other end of these conversations. It's really important to remember that and try to engage them in as many different ways as possible. Great. So on the theme of income diversification, Steve, I've seen an area that you guys quite well focused on. That's a growing and more prominent area of the not-for-profit sector, but seemingly less so in sport for development at the moment, is social enterprises. So I think less than 2% of organisations that we spoke to for the sector report listed social enterprise as one of their primary income sources. Why do you think that is, and what do you see as the opportunity here with social enterprises within sport for development?
Yeah, well, I think it's a challenging new area to go into if your organisation hasn't operated in social enterprise before. We set ours up over the last 10 years. We've been running the hotel, restaurant and conference centre, and we had no experience of doing that beforehand. So it was a huge learning curve and a huge leap from going from being a sport for good organisation, purely delivering our usual activities, to actually running businesses. And there's a complex journey, but it has actually transformed the organisation. We've had challenges this year with the pandemic, but over the last 10 years, it's hugely strengthened our financial sustainability. And I think it is a massive opportunity as organisations in our sector need to diversify. They need to find new and innovative ways of fundraising. I think social enterprise is perhaps the biggest area to be exploited that's out there. A couple of examples from the work we've done this year through the RAFT programme. We worked with Busa Baleni United Sports Academy in Zambia, who had faced similar fundraising challenges as a result of the pandemic. They had no experience in social enterprise, and we worked with them to share our soccer schools model And in the space of a month, they created a soccer schools program in Lusaka, which was generating $500 a month. And they're now looking to roll that out across 7 sites across the city. Another example, Open Field in Cameroon, excellent projects, who again, no social enterprise experience. They're now in the process of launching a equipment rental business. So they have loads of sports equipment, they have audio equipment, they have furniture that they use for their own events, but for half a year they just sit in a container, and now they're looking at hiring that out to generate income, which is then reinvested back into their program. So lots of different ways, from renting out a room to running a restaurant, but I think it is an exciting area for organisations to get stuck into.
Yeah, absolutely. It provides an ongoing kind of regular source of income as well when you get it right, of course. Brill. Obviously, we're talking a lot about fundraising, but it does not exist in a vacuum. I suppose throughout the pandemic, lots of organisations in this space have had to rethink their strategy, their programming approach, staffing, partnerships, resource allocation, which then obviously influences the whole approach to fundraising. So LaToya, as an organisation, how did you reapproach the kind of overall organisational strategy, and then what impact did that have on your fundraising activities?
Yeah, so I would say, like at a programmatic level, we definitely shifted our model to continue to create curriculum that could be done virtually or in person in the event that something like a pandemic happens again. We also looked for more ways to collaborate across all of the sites and really emphasize the power of our global network of young leaders when we were meeting with donors. And then we found new ways to engage with the communities or different partners, but made sure that we stayed true to our mission. So we assisted with like community conversations, we did some workshops, we did summits, and then we've also tackled topics like mental health and wellness, advocacy, and empowerment in partnership with other local organizations. And then I would say more from like the operations side, it made us look into like what is essential for our operation. So understanding that we need to be prepared at any moment to possibly cut back on expenses, but to make sure that we could keep our part-time coaches and our full-time staff. And then even though, we saw that shift in a lot of the priorities for funding, continuing to build those and maintain those relationships so that we were in a good position when we came out of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's really, really important. Great. Another question from the audience. Felix, this one I'm going to bring to you. So obviously for organisations who have fundraising strategies that incorporate multiple different geographies, how do you manage that operationally? Do you have multiple fundraising teams or focuses? Do you have different entities at a local level, local strategists? And how do you manage that when you're looking at lots of different geographical territories?
I think the key to that is knowing what capacity you realistically have. Obviously, the ideal is you have like a separate kind of strategy in a separate location, because there's different ways of giving are more popular in different locations. So I think monthly giving is much more popular in Europe than it is in America, and that kind of thing. And so it depends on the structure of your organisation and how much capacity the team has. I would say in general, if that is an issue, then it's best to try and channel it into like a kind of a one size fits all and push people all towards one sort of way of giving that works for you. I think there's a risk that you miss out on some stuff in different geographies, but you can only work with what you've got. And for us, that's kind of that had been the case for some time, and until recently that people could donate to our organisation only in US dollars or euros, and that was kind of like that was our only solution at the time, because we didn't have the investment to make in a kind of better a better platform and that kind of thing. I think the other thing is utilising volunteers. If you have a really good structure and really clear kind of roles for kind of independent fundraising boards in different locations, and you can task them with some of that work, that can work really, really well, and that's worked really well for us in a few different places.
Brilliant. Brilliant, thank you, Felix. Steve, coming back to strategy for the organisation again, I'm sure when you probably had to go through lots of difficult decisions over the last 18 months or so and really review and think about what the future looks like for the organisation. What have you learned in that process about the kind of strengths or vulnerabilities within your sustainability as a business? Yeah, so I'm starting with vulnerabilities. We definitely weren't prepared for a global pandemic in terms of understanding the risk of that. And obviously we have a risk assessment process in place, but we weren't prepared to suddenly have our social enterprises close overnight or to lose our ability to run international tours. So we definitely, as a result of that, strengthened our approach to risk management. I think we'll be better prepared for future scenarios. However, I would say that the investment that we put in over the last 10 years into diversifying our income paid off, because it enabled us to survive and get through the really challenging times. I think if we'd gone down the route of 100% grants or 100% social enterprise, we could have found ourselves in a lot more trouble. Going forward, we're definitely revisiting our strategy as a whole as an organisation to make sure we're doing the things that are most important for our communities and for our beneficiaries, that we're delivering the work which is best aligned with our strengths as an organisation, and our fundraising will be driven by that. And also, I think trying to have that long-term perspective as well in terms of financial sustainability and impact. I think the nature of the funding environment can be that we're often looking at 2 or 3 year cycles, and it's quite hard to then look beyond that. So we're trying to now look at strategies that are targeting 2030 sustainable development goals and trying to build fundraising models that support projects that last for that duration, as opposed to every few years revisiting. So yeah, that long-term approach to sustainability and impact is the biggest outcome in terms of our strategy, and then our fundraising as an extension of that strategy. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Mairead, I'd be really keen to kind of get your take on that as well at the Arsenal Foundation. What have you guys learned about the strengths within the model, but also any potential vulnerabilities that have been kind of brought to the fore through the pandemic? I think you're on mute again, Mairead.
Sorry, I think I think I concur a lot with what Steve said there, actually, in terms of the areas that where you see there's vulnerability are around the long-term financial sustainability of the organization, whether it's a foundation or whatever it may be. And I think having a long-term forward-looking plan is key, obviously. We do forecasting 5 years out. So obviously the pandemic hit everybody unawares, but the fact that we had a strong 5-year forecast with a strong pipeline of a diverse income stream meant that we were better prepared than we would have been if we had not had that in place. So I think in terms of having that in place was really important. In terms of our strategy, we have, having our program strategy very clearly defined based on the needs in our local and global communities is really, really important. And of course, we revisit that regularly. I think as well, having a governance model that's really strong, overseeing, for example, our foundation with a board of trustees, where all of these, our strategy is reviewed, our risk register is reviewed, our pipeline is reviewed and debated on a continuous basis is really, really important. So having those touch points on a regular basis to make sure you're on track is really important. And then, continuously reviewing your income stream. Diversification has come up a number of times here today, and I think that that's really important. And somebody mentioned about, what areas are untapped. I think for our sector, there's definitely something around corporates and bringing more corporates who are involved in the, they may not necessarily be sports organizations themselves, but organizations who are supplying kit or, other suppliers who could be brought into this, particularly when you're starting to look at the SDGs. And we know that a huge amount of these corporates have the SDGs on their radar. They have ambitions around purpose. They have, quite defined now CSR targets, which, you know, all of us working in sports for development have been working on these outcomes for years and years and years. But, you know, a lot of these corporates are bringing them more to the forefront of their own strategies. And I think we can tap into that a bit more. But we need to be very clear proposition to them. And we need to strengthen that, and we need to start including that in our pipeline as well. So yeah, those would be my thoughts on it going forward, just to make sure that your governance is strong enough and that you're well prepared for any eventuality, and that you have a very strong pipeline.
Yeah, absolutely, fantastic. Yeah, I think governance is such a fundamental and increasingly important component when investors, donors are looking at organisations. And I suppose that links to the next question, which is about kind of some of the factors that sit around a fundraising strategy and what we call investment readiness components. And a big one for lots of organisations who are here today will be capacity and having limited resources for fundraising. So Felix, what would your advice be in terms of how an organisation can maximise the resources they've got in fundraising when in many cases it's limited? It might be volunteer-led, it might be a single person. How do you maximise that? How do you prioritise? And I suppose what other areas of support do you think are out there for people to call upon to support with that? You've already mentioned volunteers; it's a great source. Are there any others as well in the mix there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of two sides to prioritising, I think, and one is if you're in a bit of a panic mode in a situation like we have been in, and the team's kind of swamped with fundraising work, and the organisation has a big need, and you're only really able to think in the short term. And we've certainly been in situations like that at times, and I don't think it's a secret in the fundraising world that, like, when you're in a situation like that, you have to look at the figures in black and white. What is going to bring in the most funds for the organisation? What leads have the greatest likelihood of kind of creating the most impact for your beneficiaries and the communities you work with, and kind of prioritise based on that. And then I think there's another element that's like, if there's a sort of longer term sustainability, scalability strategy, and if you have a bit more breathing room and you're not in so much of a panic mode, then you can kind of focus on the future in that sense, and think about that. Are you putting time into sort of developing systems that will help you manage sort of large numbers of donor communications, and do you have like smooth systems for tracking leads and organising meetings with all your grantors and that kind of stuff? I think yeah, sometimes it's easy to get into a habit of kind of doing stuff ad hoc because it's quicker at that moment, and there might be a kind of a better time in investment there. And I think you've also got to be able to sort of draw, in terms of drawing on different resources, draw on the capacity of the whole team or everyone that's kind of involved. I think it's times like that where you can kind of forget sort of job titles as such, and just work together to get the best results for your students or beneficiaries. So just because someone doesn't have a lot of experience in securing huge grants doesn't mean that a supporter wouldn't want to talk to them. And sometimes, in our case, sometimes some supporters just spending a bit of time speaking with a teacher at one of our schools that's running our sports programs has been like a really good way to get people kind of invested. Other kind of areas of support, I think board members can be really valuable in terms of identifying funding opportunities and leads, and I think previous kind of supporters, current supporters that you have, like if you have that open and kind of honest communication and are working really well with your current supporters, they can also lead you to other sources of income. So yeah, drawing on current supporters, board members, even kind of your mentors, your family, your friends. There's connections to be found all over, and I think that just goes back to the creativity angle that we were talking about before.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you, Felix. Yeah, loads of great things to take from that. I'm conscious of the time. I think we've just got we've probably got just enough time to get in our final round of questions, which I think from each of you, yeah, it'd be great to just kind of get your kind of closing thoughts or your kind of takeaway bits of advice. We really want to end on a positive note in terms of some practical takeaways. So I'll go to each of you to kind of give your closing statements and sentiments. So LaToya, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, so during one of the workshops we did, someone said this statement, and I believe this is probably one of the reasons that our organization and many others made it through the pandemic, but our keynote speaker simply said collaboration over competition. And so I think we're all here based on our mission to help the greater good. So it's really important to build relationships with other organizations to find out, how they've approached donors, learn more about like their successes, what hasn't worked for them, and then also just to see like how you all can come together for a project. So just figuring out a way to bring both of your strengths to the table so that you guys can create something dynamic. And there is competition and you guys are competing for dollars, but I think there's enough space for everyone and that we only make each other better. And I know I was truly grateful, especially because I came on right before the pandemic, for the relationships that I was able to build and just how open and supportive that other organizations were when it came to the information sharing and just warm introductions and just kind of helping me like navigate, the new director role.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, LaToya. Steve, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, amazing point by LaToya. I think that was really powerful about collaboration, and something we believe in strongly as well at Kick for Life is we invest in the sector, we're stronger together, and groups of organisations like Beyond Sport, Laureus, Common Goal, we can achieve more collectively. But for my closing point, I think I'll go back to social enterprise, which is probably our USP, and just encourage organisations that maybe haven't tried it before to have a go at exploring what might be possible, to diversify your income and also extend your program model by creating social businesses that can improve your sustainability. And there's support and learning out there from organisations like Kick for Life. We've gone through a lot of experience and we've got hopefully a lot to share that could support others on that journey into social enterprise.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. Mairead?
Sorry, there's a problem with my mute button all the time. So for me, I mean, yes, I agree with Steve and LaToya. I think collaboration is key. But one other thing I wanted to mention, which is I think it's been a really tough time for fundraisers. And my background before I came to the Arsenal Foundation was fundraising. And, I think we almost need to find ourselves again. And, I would say to be ambitious, because I think, we as fundraisers were used to asks and putting in asks. And because we've had such a tough time during the pandemic, I think we talk a lot about the challenges, and we can tend to be a bit cautious coming out of the pandemic. So I would say don't be afraid to be ambitious, put in, full pitches, go after the asks, because we're all emerging from this pandemic. And your kind of future donors, whether it's corporates, whether it's institutions or individuals, all know that we're coming out of something that's been a universal experience. And I think people will be willing to give. So I would say be ambitious, go for it, and remember that you're a fundraiser and don't be afraid of the ask.
Yeah. Brilliant. I love that as a closing message, Mairead. Fantastic. Felix?
Yeah, I would agree with everyone, especially on the point on collaboration. But I think also just really keeping your organisation's mission, and the impact on your students or beneficiaries at the very core of your motivation, and your passion for the organisation's work will always kind of like shine through. Try to think positively about the future. I would say support each other, be creative, keep looking for opportunities to adapt, and yeah, do everything you can to diversify funding streams. And if you haven't been in the place to do that up until now, I would say try and use this moment as a bit of a Kickstarter to start making that happen. And yeah, and then always remember that fundraising is all about relationships and great communications, and building a bond with your supporters is sort of everything, especially in times like these.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with everything that's been said. I can't believe it's almost an hour already. Just in terms of just summing up, I think some of the things I've really taken from this and noted, I think something that's come through really clearly is obviously start with existing donors and really focus on building those relationships. Long-term planning, I think that is a message loud and clear. Don't think short-term, really think about what we need to do for the long term. Creativity was a word that came through time and time again. Think really creatively during these circumstances, how we can adapt and make sure we're more relevant than ever for our audiences. Be authentic in terms of the messaging, communications, our identity, stay true to ourselves. Find a way to put a spotlight on your work organisation. Not everyone's going to win an Oscar necessarily, but find different ways of generating that interest and connection with your various audiences. And I think something, perhaps a really good way to end in an emergency, find a raft, reduce, adapt, fundraise, and trade. I think that's a really, really nice way of summing that up. So before I hand over to Beth, just want to say a huge thank you to the panelists for their time, and yeah, some fantastic messages and advice there. It's been a real pleasure moderating today's panel.
Thank you, Luke, and thank you for everyone in the audience who took the time to join us today. We will be in touch via email in the coming days and week to share with you how you can keep in touch with Oaks, and obviously share some more information about the recording, because today has been recorded, and we very much hope that you might share it with colleagues and it sparks further discussions in your teams. The final webinar in the series will be taking place on Thursday, the 23rd of September. So more details will come your way about how to sign up for that. And after which we will be relaunching the survey. The original survey will be a year old, so we will absolutely be looking for data to see where the sector is and how it feels about fundraising 1 year on. So we look forward to hopefully having lots of you fill in that survey when it gets released. Yeah, but once again, as Luke said, thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to our panellists and Luke for your chairing, and we very much hope to see everyone back in September. Thanks, guys.